A massive judicial bombshell just shattered California's financial foundation, potentially triggering a brutal economic collapse for millions of residents. This isn't just about politicians or temporary deficits. It's an urgent crisis heading toward your bank account, your children's classrooms, and your local community. We are witnessing a legal disaster that wiped out billions in supposed state income that was already committed to being spent. Time is running out before these impacts hit your doorstep with more force than anyone is willing to admit. I'm your guide through the noise, providing the deep analysis that traditional media outlets often overlook. If you appreciate investigative content that connects high-level policy to your daily life, please subscribe to this channel. Like this video immediately to help bypass the algorithms before the next wave of financial reductions is revealed. My question for the community today is simple. Do you believe your local leaders provide a transparent view of fiscal health before things fall apart? Share your perspective below. I genuinely value your insight. Pass this report to anyone who thinks government spreadsheets are tedious, because that tedium just became incredibly expensive for every citizen. Here is the reality of the situation. California's leadership wagered a multi-billion-dollar recovery strategy on a shaky legal premise that they could retroactively seize tax credits from major firms through a fresh interpretation of ancient statutes. The state wasn't proposing new levies or slashing current programs. They were gambling everything on a courtroom victory that would let them reach into the past for money companies already legally possessed. Then, a state appellate court reviewed the scheme and delivered a crushing blow. They didn't just disagree. They labeled the entire logic flawed, the revenue goals imaginary, and the budget solution non-existent. Governments cannot simply invent new rules to fix old spending mistakes. Basically, the state spent money it can no longer grab, and the resulting vacuum has no safety net. This is a tragedy of creative accounting and executive overreach, appearing the moment a regime realizes its house was built on shifting sand. Let's slip back 18 months. The fiscal horizon was already darkening. Income was trailing behind expectations. Massive tech layoffs were eroding the tax base. Capital gains, which usually fuel the state's massive spending, were tanking as the economy slowed. Even the non-partisan analysts warned that structural holes were growing. Expenses were outstripping revenue even during periods of growth. But with an election looming, no one wanted to mention budget cuts. Instead, finance teams hunted for a magic wand. They needed massive capital. They needed it instantly, and they wanted to avoid a public legislative brawl. That's when a bureaucrat found a loophole buried in the corporate code regarding how national companies calculate their state obligations. It involved the specific single sales formula determining what portion of national profits the state could claim. For years, the state permitted an older, beneficial method that lowered corporate burdens. Businesses relied on this, closed their ledgers, and invested accordingly. But suddenly, state lawyers argued that the prior interpretation was a mistake. They claimed the SILT was too lenient, and the law actually demanded a higher rate that could be applied backward across several years. The goal was a $4 billion haul. Essentially, the state said, "We know you followed the rules we set, but we've changed our minds, and now you owe us a fortune." This wasn't a fresh tax. It was a rewrite of history applied to the past. The administration immediately plugged that imaginary $4 billion into their balance sheet. They didn't wait for a judge's blessing. They spent it on paper, balancing the books with funds that didn't exist. Predictably, the targeted corporations with elite legal squads sued. They argued the rules couldn't be changed after the fact, that they acted in good faith, and that this violated every principle of due process. Yet, the governor's team doubled down. They promised the legislature the cash was coming. They told the public everything was fine. They authorized massive spending based on that phantom $4 billion. Schools were promised raises. Roads were greenlit. Pensions were scheduled for funding. It all rested on a legal prayer. Then the case arrived at the appeals court. The state's lawyers argued the law always meant what they now claimed, accusing companies of years of underpayment. The defense countered that this was a transparent gimmick, disguised as enforcement. The judges were skeptical. Months ticked by while the state continued spending as if the money was already in the vault. Last week, the hammer dropped. It was a unanimous defeat. The panel ruled that the state's new logic was legally hollow. They confirmed the original formula was correct, that companies had a right to rely on existing guidance, and that retroactive grabbing was unconstitutional. The ruling used terms like fiscal desperation. It didn't just stop the money, it burned the bridge. $4 billion vanished instantly. Not a delay, a total loss. A budget built on legal fantasies will always end in reality. Think about that. The government already allocated that wealth. Departments hired personnel based on those funds. Contracts were signed. Bonds were issued using those projections. Now, a single ruling has punched a massive hole through the state's heart. The official response was a brief statement about reviewing options, but there was no plan B. No emergency measures, just silence as the clock runs out. Here is how the dominoes fall. First, credit ratings. Wall Street is watching. Agencies already flagged the state's habit of using one-time gimmicks. This loss triggers a downgrade review. If the rating drops, borrowing costs spike. Every future school or bridge becomes more expensive. Taxpayers don't just lose the $4 billion, they pay higher interest on everything for decades. Second, immediate slashes. The Constitution requires a balanced ledger. Since the money is gone, spending must be hacked mid-year. Schools will see promised funds disappear. Infrastructure might halt. Health programs might freeze. Third, local impact. The crisis doesn't stay in the capital. The state funds everything from local police to homeless services. When the state bleeds, your city feels it. They either cut services or hike your local fees, pushing the pain directly onto you. This is the true price of creative math. Consider Maria, who manages a youth program in a struggling city. She was promised funding through June. Now, her 12 employees might lose their jobs and 80 children lose their safe space. Those parents then lose work hours to find childcare. That isn't a line item. It's a family's life shredded because the court said the money was never real. Or, look at the bus system. Routes connecting low-income residents to hospitals depend on state subsidies. Without that cash, the routes die. Seniors can't get medicine. Workers can't reach their shifts. A technical legal loss becomes a cascade of personal tragedies for people who never had a seat at the table. Meanwhile, the political theatre begins. Opponents call this the inevitable result of recklessness, accusing leaders of gambling with ghosts to avoid tough choices before an election. Allies argue the court was too rigid, and corporations are using loopholes. Both sides are shouting, but neither has a solution for the growing $4 billion void. Why did they do this? Because the truth was politically toxic. Fixing a gap honestly requires either painful cuts that upset voters or tax hikes that require a supermajority. Both are career killers, but a technical reinterpretation is quiet. It doesn't cause protests until it blows up. The gamble failed, and now the explosion is here. There is a deep irony in California posing as a global model for social progress while running a budget like a casino. You cannot build a stable welfare state on a volatile, boom-and-bust revenue model. Every time the market dips, they use tricks instead of reform. This ruling didn't create the problem, it just pulled back the curtain. Let's look at the mechanism. Trailer bills. These are technical laws passed in a rush that hide massive changes from public view. Most lawmakers didn't even understand the risk. It passed because nobody wanted to admit the budget was broken. The court's ruling wasn't just a legal rejection, it was a moral one. It stated that you cannot treat the law as a flexible tool for grabbing cash. This puts every future creative scheme under a microscope. Patching holes just got much harder. What comes next? The options are all terrible. They can appeal, which just delays the pain. They can settle for pennies on the dollar, which looks like a surrender. They can trigger across-the-board cuts, which punishes good programs and bad ones alike. Or they can try new taxes, which is political suicide during high inflation. None of this fixes the structural rot. Expenses for pensions and healthcare grow regardless of income. The gap is filled with hope and mirrors. While the Capitol debates, the consequences are hitting. Hiring freezes are active. Projects are stalling. Non-profits are praying their bank accounts don't hit zero. This isn't theoretical. It's happening while you watch this. California is the world's 5th largest economy. Yet it cannot manage a predictable budget because the system rewards short-term survival over long-term stability. Powerful groups resist reform, voters want everything for nothing, and politicians promise both. This case proves what happens when leaders choose fantasy over mirth. When the bill arrives, the architects are rarely the ones who pay. If the state gambled $4 billion on a weak theory, what other facts in the budget are actually lies? How many other projections are fake? This ruling destroyed the credibility of the entire system. Even if you don't live there, this is a warning. Governments everywhere are using gimmicks to avoid reality. It never works. The bill always comes due. Think of the fire station waiting for new equipment to save lives. Or the student whose nursing program just got capped. These are the stakes. This isn't about drama, it's about whether a government can keep its word. To recap, the state hit a deficit, gambled on a retroactive tax grab, spent the money before they won, and now faces a total collapse of that plan. The fallout is hitting the most vulnerable first. This was an internal choice, not an act of God. The scramble is just starting. If credit drops and interest rises, the pressure will become a death spiral. Unless there is a fundamental change, this house of cards is coming down. Here is the question. Should the officials who build budgets on legal gambles be held personally liable for the fallout? Let me know in the comments. Please subscribe to Winds of Thought, so you don't miss the next update. Like this video to help us fight for the truth. Share this with everyone who thinks policy doesn't matter. The next chapter is written in layoffs and broken promises. Consider the sheer scale of the administrative burden involved in tracking every single one of these fiscal failures as they ripple through the state's sprawling bureaucracy. When $4 billion disappears from the ledger of a massive economy, the shockwaves are not just felt in the halls of Sacramento. They are felt in the very fabric of the civil services that maintain our roads, secure our borders, and educate the next generation of leaders. The leadership in place has essentially bet the collective future of the populace on a legal interpretation that was deemed flawed by every single judge who sat on that panel. This is not a matter of subjective interpretation. It is a definitive rejection of a specific type of governance that relies on retroactive punishment rather than proactive planning. Furthermore, the impact on the state's long-term reputation as a stable environment for business cannot be overstated. Companies that have invested billions into the local infrastructure now have to wonder if their tax liabilities from years ago are truly settled, or if they will be subject to the whims of a future administration desperate for quick cash. This creates an atmosphere of extreme uncertainty that drives investment away and forces high earners to look toward more predictable jurisdictions. When you look at the human cost, it goes beyond just the immediate service cuts. It impacts the confidence that citizens have in their own democratic institutions. If the budget can be manipulated through technical trailer bills that bypass the standard legislative scrutiny, then the entire concept of a transparent, representative government is put at risk. This case is a stark reminder that fiscal responsibility is not just a conservative or liberal talking point. It is the fundamental duty of those who are entrusted with the public's hard-earned money. As we move forward into this new era of financial instability, we must demand more than just apologies or political pivot points. We must demand a return to the basics of accounting, where revenue is verified before it is spent, and where the law is respected as a stable foundation rather than a flexible tool for executive convenience. The situation in California serves as a primary example for every other state in the country of exactly what happens when political ambition outpaces economic reality. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never let them convince you that this type of crisis was unavoidable. It was a choice, and now, it is a lesson for us all. Stay informed, stay critical. Don't let them tell you this was inevitable. It wasn't, it was a choice. Would you like me to adjust the ending to include more specific details on the trailer bill process, or provide a deeper dive into the credit rating impact?